Okay, hello everybody. Let's take off our political science hat and put on our history hat because we're going to talk about World War One. So World War One started in July of 1914 and ended in November 11th, 1918. By the end of the war, over 17 million people were killed, including about 100,000 American troops. So there was a chain of events that started World War One. One of the first things that happened was Gavrilo Princip killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And, kind of a lot of these escalating tensions into the Balkans, along with the assassination, set off a chain of events that would eventually lead to the start of World War One barely a month later. Also, warlike actions like the Lusitania and the Sussex, which were attacked by the Germans and sunk by the Germans, where in the Sussex there was about 80 Americans that passed away, and in the Lusitania, which was a British-owned steamship, there was 128 Americans that died on that ship, or on that sub when it was sinking. Ship, not a sub. At that time, Congress more than doubled the size of the regular army, federalized the National Guard, and gave it about 440,000 people. There were investments to strengthen the Navy of 313 million people. $1 million, and $50 million to build merchant ships. So we had two great coalitions at the time, the Allies and the Central Powers. The Allies were mainly made up of Great Britain, France, and Russia, and the Central Powers were made up of Germany and Austria and Hungary. And they had been competing for power ever since the end of the 19th century, but were never able to really resolve their conflicts. So at that time, Woodrow Wilson, who was president, asked Congress to declare war in April 1917 on the German Empire. Germany had actually tried to set up the U.S. through something called the Zimmermann Telegram. So what the Zimmermann Telegram showed was that the Germans were trying to provoke a war between the United States and Mexico. There was a decoded message from Germany that sought to have Mexico get into a war with the U.S. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense because the U.S., if they paying attention to Mexico, neighbor to the south, then as always, your back door or maybe the East Coast would be open to an attack. Before it was over, 30 sovereign states became evolved, 4 empires would be overthrown, and 7 new nations would be born. Some 30 million lives were lost. Half of them were non-combatants or civilians in this war. Wilson also passed something called the Selective Service Act, and as males here in the United States, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're a male, what do you have to do at 18? You have to register for the draft. So Wilson passed the Selective Service Act of 1917 using conscription or a draft to send 10,000 soldiers per day to France. He also raised income tax, set up bonds. Remember, a bond is something that you can purchase from the government. The government will then use that money for a big project, and some years down the line, you'll get money back with interest. It's not that much, but it's a very safe investment. He also asked Congress to pass laws that eventually became the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act, which suppressed anti-draft activists. As Germany continued to attack American merchant ships, Wilson's cabinet wanted to go to war, and Wilson declared that an imperial government must be crushed and the world must be made safe for democracy. And one of these interesting things that Wilson comes out with is he was one of the people that were advocating for the United States becoming kind of the world police. With the draft, we had about 4,649 draft boards staffed by civilians. Nearly 3 million people went to the armed forces, all but 8,000 to the Army. And during that 18-month, also about 2 million men joined the Army or the armed services voluntarily. World War I cost Americans about $32 billion. Remember, this is 1917 money. About $7 billion of this was loaned to the Allies. This helped increase national prosperity as, anytime there is a lot of manufacturing done in the United States during wartime, that does generate revenue. 4 master drives were used to sell bonds, which were successful. At that time, we also saw a curtailing of civil liberties, right? The Espionage Act of 1917 imposed stiff fines and jail sentences on people who interfered with recruiting efforts and made false statements about the war. It also authorized the Postmaster General to ban printed material he considered to be treasonable. So, there is, a bit of a problem here, as we could see that, the Postmaster General is looking at maybe some of this mail from a subjective point of view. So, you're probably relying on one person's opinion. The Sedition Act even went farther. It made it a crime to utter, print, write, publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, abusive language about the government, the Constitution, the armed forces, or the flag. So kind of curtailing people's freedom of speech. Can't speak out against the government. Can't question the government under the Sedition Act. As we know, a lot of people, and I'm kind of along the school of thought that the most American thing you can do is to criticize the government. You know what I mean? It's okay to question your government. African Americans were they strongly endorsed the war effort, and more than 400,000 African Americans served in the army. However, they were assigned to segregated camps, and 3 of every 4 served as a laborer. On the Western Front, kind of that separation between the war effort in Europe from France going up into Germany. There are about 300,000 Americans in France. They were unfortunately inadequately equipped. Reinforcements soon came, and by July 1, there were more than a million troops on the Western Front, or the space between the fighting between the Allied powers and the Central powers. Germany launched a massive spring attack that left them only 50 miles from Paris. The AEF, or the Armed Expeditionary Force troops, fought valiantly at the battles of Chateau Thierry and Belleau Wood, and helped the French stop that German advance. At that time, the Allies also launched a counterattack that totally turned the tide in the war. In late September, the Allied powers were on the brink of invading Germany. At that time, the German High Command began to press for an armistice or a peace treaty. On October 6th, Wilson was contacted, and requested an immediate suspension of hostilities. The Great War, as it was called, ended on November 11th, which is a holiday for us now. It's Veterans Day. The American losses include 112,432 people. More than half was from disease. So as we can see, there wasn't a lot of vaccinations that were going on during that time. Wilson also kind of practiced a form of idealism, and he believed that world peace would be created if we implemented these 14 points. I have the 14 points posted here on the internet. If you go in and look at it, basically what he does is he expresses, an emphasis on self-determination for people, advocating the spread of democracy, advocating the spread of capitalism, opposing isolationism, and having that intervention spirit that we saw, where you feel that you need to get involved in a situation to prevent maybe the spread of communism, as we're going to see in the next few years. So Wilson was very much a person that wanted to stay away from isolationism and intervene in conflicts when he thought it was appropriate or when democracy was threatened. So if you look at these 14 points, you don't have to know exactly every single 14 points on this, but just know generally what he was trying to accomplish. A lot of it was that he was trying to prevent this, democracies falling and going into the hands of non-democratic organizations, as he felt that it was the U.S.'s responsibility to spread democracy throughout the world. And that's still kind of a weird argument that we have even today, is how much should the United States be involved in conflicts? All right. So that's World War I. We're going to talk a little bit more about war when we get to World War II and some of the battles in there. But yeah, we'll go from there. We will talk to you soon.